In a cave in northern Spain, researchers examining the bones of a Neanderthal family, two adults, several adolescents, and at least one young child found the same kind of cut marks and deliberately fractured shafts you would expect on the remains of a butchered deer. The bones had been defleshed, cracked open, and the marrow inside them had been extracted. This was not an isolated, unexplained case. It is one of several documented sites where the physical evidence points toward the same unsettling conclusion that at some point, in the depths of a brutal season, these people ate members of their own group. The story most people know about ancient winter survival is a story about ingenuity, fire, fur, shelter, food stored away in advance. That story is true, as far as it goes. But it leaves out the part that only shows up when the ingenuity had already failed, when the stored food ran out weeks before the thaw, and the only calories left within reach belonged to someone who had already died. This video is not about the clever inventions that got most ancient winters survived. It is about what happened at the edge, when cleverness ran out, and about why archaeologists still cannot always agree on what that evidence actually means. That disagreement is not a minor academic footnote. It shapes how we understand what ancient people were actually capable of, and how thin the line really was between the group that survived a catastrophic winter and the group that did not. The Spanish site is called El Cidrón in Asturias, and the remains recovered there, roughly a dozen individuals in total, date to somewhere in the range of 43,000 to 49,000 years ago, depending on which dating method researchers apply to the sediment. What makes El Cidrón especially informative is not only the cut marks themselves, but what shows up in the teeth. Growth lines in the enamel of several individuals record repeated episodes of what researchers call nutritional stress. Essentially, malnutrition severe enough to leave a permanent mark on how the teeth developed. More than a third of the recovered bones show signs of deliberate human processing, cutting, breaking, and the kind of percussion fractures produced when someone smashes a bone open specifically to get at the marrow inside. Taken together, the pattern reads less like an isolated act of violence and more like a group under sustained dietary pressure, doing what starving people have done in documented cases throughout history, extracting every last calorie from a body that could no longer object. If tracing what the physical evidence can and cannot actually prove is the kind of investigation you want more of, subscribing means the next one lands in your feed. For a long time, that would have been the entire story. Hunger explains the bones, case closed. Except a second site, far to the north in what is now Somerset, England, complicates that explanation directly. Gough's cave contains the remains of at least three individuals, dated to roughly 14,700 years ago during the Magdalenian period. And the processing here is, if anything, more thorough and more careful than at El Cidrón. Researcher Sylvia Bello of London's Natural History Museum has described a genuinely meticulous sequence. Skulls, scrupulously cleaned of soft tissue shortly after death, cut marks around the lips, cheeks, and tongue, the eyes removed, and finally the brain case itself shaped, with the base and facial bones carefully trimmed away into what researchers believe functioned as a drinking cup. Bello has pointed out something that should genuinely complicate the hunger explanation. The site also contains substantial evidence of ordinary animal meat, deer, horse, and other game, processed and available around the same time. People who already had food were still disassembling human bodies with this much precision. That does not look like starvation. It looks like ritual, a deliberate, culturally meaningful practice built around the dead, not a desperate last resort. So, now there are two sites, two very different explanations, and both are grounded in real physical evidence rather than guesswork. El Cidrón points toward hunger, Gough's cave points toward ceremony. And that contradiction is exactly where this video needs to slow down and change direction, because the honest answer is not that one site is right and the other is wrong. It is that the clean line most people assume exists between desperate survival and deliberate culture may not have existed at all for most of prehistory. A group that had already learned to process human remains for one reason, whether hunger or ritual, would have carried that same knowledge, the same tools, the same practice technique into the next crisis, whatever caused it. Survival and ceremony were not necessarily two separate categories of behavior taking turns. They may have been the same skill set, reused, depending on what a given winter actually demanded. That is a considerably more uncomfortable idea than either explanation on its own, because it means the darkest moments of ancient winters were not always clearly separable from the culture and belief systems people carried the rest of the year. That contradiction raises an obvious follow up question. If both hunger and ritual can leave cut marks on human bone, how does anyone actually tell them apart? And how confident should we really be in either label? Bello and her colleagues addressed exactly that question directly in a 2016 study comparing bone modifications across several prehistoric sites. The pattern they found was not subtle. At Gough's Cave, cut marks show up on more than 65% of the recovered bone surfaces, alongside clear human tooth marks, the kind of damage that specifically indicates flesh was chewed and consumed rather than simply removed. At a separate set of sites in Serbia, interpreted as funerary defleshing carried out well after death as part of a burial ritual with no eating involved, cut marks appear on less than 1% of the bones, and human tooth marks are essentially absent entirely. That gap, 65% against less than 1%, is what actually allows researchers to say with real confidence that Gough's Cave represents consumption rather than a purely symbolic funerary practice, and it is the same kind of quantified comparison that supports the nutritional stress reading at El Cedron. But even that method has its limits, and the site that proves it best is Krapina in modern Croatia, one of the largest collections of Neanderthal remains ever recovered, representing more than 20 individuals and studied since the early 1900s. For decades, Krapina was cited as some of the oldest suspected evidence of cannibalism anywhere. Then, in the 1980s, paleoanthropologist Eric Trinkhaus proposed a genuinely more cautious alternative. He argued that at least some of the bone breakage and scattering at Krapina could be explained by rockfall, sediment pressure, and the activity of other animals in the cave over tens of thousands of years, rather than by people processing bodies at all, human or otherwise. Later researchers have leaned toward a middle position, that Krapina most likely does show real, deliberate defleshing and disarticulation of human bodies, but as part of secondary burial practices rather than consumption, since the specific cut mark patterns. They more closely resemble bones stripped after a period of natural decay than bones butchered fresh for eating. Line all three sites up together, and a spectrum appears that the popular version of this story never mentions. Some ancient human remains show unmistakable evidence of being eaten. Others show careful, deliberate handling that most researchers now read as funerary rather than nutritional. And at least one major site remains genuinely unresolved, sitting somewhere between deliberate human ritual and simple geological accident, more than a century after it was first excavated. There is a fourth possibility that recent research has raised, and it is arguably darker than either hunger or ritual, because it removes desperation from the explanation almost entirely. At a cave called Goyet, in present-day Belgium, researchers examining Neanderthal remains dated to roughly 41,000 to 45,000 years ago identified a pattern of butchery concentrated specifically on women and children with cut marks and deliberately broken limb bones, closely resembling how these same populations processed game animals for meat and marrow. The researchers behind that analysis have suggested the individuals involved may not have belonged to the local group at all, raising the unsettling possibility that they were killed and eaten by outsiders rather than consumed by their own starving relatives. If that reading holds up under further study, it would mean at least some of what looks identical to survival cannibalism in the bone record was never really about surviving a bad winter in the first place. It may have been an act of violence between separate groups that simply left the same kind of physical trace behind. This is a genuinely recent finding based on one detailed study of one site, and it has not replaced the hunger or ritual explanations elsewhere. It has simply added yet another possibility to a picture that was already more complicated than most people assume. Evidence that even within a single behavior, cutting apart a human body, the reasons a late Pleistocene group might have done it stretch from calorie desperation to sacred custom to something closer to predation. Cannibalism sits at the extreme edge of what people were willing to do for calories, but there is a second kind of desperate winter labor that never crosses a moral line and still tells you exactly how close to the edge some groups were living. Once every obvious scrap of meat and marrow had already been stripped from an animal carcass, there was still one more source of calories left, buried inside the bone itself. And Getting it out required an amount of effort that only makes sense if the alternative was genuine starvation. Researchers working at a site called Neumark Nord in Germany, associated with Neanderthal populations roughly 125,000 years ago, found the crushed and fragmented remains of at least 172 individual large mammals, producing tens of thousands of bone fragments concentrated around evidence of sustained heating. The process itself, confirmed through modern experimental archaeology, is almost absurdly labor intensive. You smash the bones into small pieces, drop them into water, and boil the mixture for hours until droplets of fat slowly separate and rise to the surface, where they can be skimmed off. A single session could take the better part of a day and produce only a modest amount of usable grease. Nobody does that for a treat. Researchers studying the site describe it as evidence of a genuine fat factory, a large scale, organized operation built around extracting every remaining calorie from bones that had already given up their meat and marrow, almost certainly timed to the lean season when stored fat mattered most. It is one of the least dramatic looking and most quietly desperate survival technologies ever documented, precisely because it required so much effort for so little return, and groups only tend to accept that kind of exchange rate when the alternative is worse. Winter's darkest toll was not only physical and not only measured in calories. Among some Arctic and circumpolar peoples in the more recent historical record, ethnographers and later medical researchers documented a startling and still disputed phenomenon known as Piebloktuk, sometimes called Arctic hysteria in older literature, episodes in which a person, most often a woman, would suddenly tear off her clothing, run out into the snow, scream, throw objects, and behave in ways completely outside her ordinary conduct, often with no memory of the episode afterward. Researchers have proposed a genuinely wide range of explanations, including one hypothesis pointing to hypervitaminosis A, essentially vitamin poisoning, from eating polar bear or seal liver, which concentrates the vitamin at levels that can affect the nervous system. Other researchers have proposed psychological and social explanations tied directly to prolonged isolation, extended darkness, and the extraordinary stress of enclosure inside a small shelter with the same small group of people for months at a time. It is worth being honest about the uncertainty here. A meaningful number of researchers now question whether Piblok was ever a single, coherent phenomenon at all, rather than a label European and American observers applied inconsistently to a range of different behaviors they did not fully understand, filtered through the assumptions of outsiders encountering an unfamiliar culture under unfamiliar conditions. Whatever was actually happening, the documented pattern itself is real, and it points to something the cut marks and the bone fragments cannot show on their own, that surviving an Arctic winter sometimes meant absorbing a kind of psychological pressure that occasionally broke through in ways that genuinely frightened the people who witnessed it. Reports of episodes like these also became noticeably rarer over the 20th century, which researchers studying the phenomenon have connected to changing diets, growing outside contact, and a shift away from the specific isolated winter conditions under which the earliest reports were recorded, itself a quiet piece of evidence that the environment people were enduring, not some fixed trait of the people themselves, was doing most of the work. Part of why this picture has gotten clearer only recently is that researchers now have a tool that did not exist when many of these sites were first excavated. A method called zooarchaeology by mass spectrometry, usually shortened to ZooMS, identifies the species a bone fragment came from by analyzing the specific collagen proteins preserved inside it, even when the fragment is far too small or too damaged to identify just by looking at it. Older excavations, working decades before this technology existed, routinely sorted bone fragments by eye, which means smashed, unidentifiable pieces sitting in a museum drawer for 100 years could easily have been human and simply never recognized as such. Zooms has already confirmed the presence of human bone within assemblages that earlier researchers had cataloged as unidentified animal fragments. That single development means the honest current answer to how common this behavior actually was is still being revised upward in real time, as older collections get re-examined with tools their original excavators never had access to. None of this fits comfortably next to the usual, more encouraging version of how ancient people got through winter. But comfort was never the standard this video was working toward. What the evidence actually supports is narrower and considerably harder to sit with. At least some groups, in at least some winters, crossed a line that most of their descendants would spend the rest of history trying not to think about, and the physical remains left behind resist a single, clean explanation for why. Whether a specific set of cut marks reflects hunger, ritual, or some tangled combination, the people involved never separated in their own minds is frequently something the bones themselves cannot settle. That is not a gap in the research. It may be an accurate reflection of how genuinely blurred that line was at the time. It is also worth remembering that sites like these remain rare exceptions within an enormous archaeological record, discovered precisely because something unusual happened there, which means the surviving evidence is very likely skewed toward crisis rather than routine. Most ancient winters, on the strength of everything else the archaeological record shows, were survived without anyone ever crossing that line at all. So return, one last time, to that family in the cave in northern Spain, their bones bearing the same marks left on the deer and horses they once hunted alongside. It is not proof that ancient people were somehow less human than we are. If anything, it is close to the opposite. Given a winter harsh enough and long enough, the line between what a group considers unthinkable and what it considers necessary can move much further than most of us would ever want to believe about ourselves. Which feels more disturbing to you? That people were driven to that point at all, or that we still cannot always tell bone by bone whether it was hunger or something closer to belief that put them there? Let me know what you think, and I will see you in the next one.